designing, optimizing, and maintaining a database administrative solution using SQL Server 2008. Here's what we're going to cover. In this introductory module, we're just going to sort of outline the table of contents, and I'm going to introduce you to the SQL Server toolset that will be your way of interacting with the product. Next, we're going to look at functional concepts and architecture for SQL Server, followed by physical concepts and architecture. So sort of how SQL works from a logical standpoint, and then what SQL actually looks like physically sitting on a server. We'll talk about planning and installation, which will sort of take into account all the factors we talk about in those two nuggets. Then we'll actually install SQL Server 2008. We'll create and use a database in the nugget after that, so you can really get a view for how this all comes together. Then we're going to step back to sort of other installation-related topics like migration, consolidation, and upgrading a SQL Server from an older version of the product. Next, in Nugget 8, we're going to look at the first layer of SQL Server security, which is security at the instance level. You can kind of loosely refer to this as server security, although as you're going to learn, you can have multiple instances of SQL Server's database engine running on a single machine, so referring to this as server-wide security can be a little bit ambiguous. So we're going to call it instance security, and then we'll follow it with the next level of security, which is the individual database level security. We'll look at some of the options for high availability, things like clustering, database mirroring, and log shipping, and then move on to basic backup and restore. We'll actually get quite complex with the restore options, so you've got a lot of different ways to get out of a bad situation, depending on exactly what's going on. Then we're going to dive into some of the high availability options in a little bit more detail, looking at database mirroring and clustering individually. And then we'll look at monitoring SQL Server, finding out what it's doing and what its performance looks like. And if you're not happy with the performance, we will then go into optimizing that performance, making it a little bit better. At least touching on the things that you as a SQL Server database administrator can do to affect performance. Not necessarily the things that a developer would do to improve the performance of a database-centric application. Then we'll move on to some maintenance and management topics. In 16, we'll look at maintenance, how to rebuild databases, rebuild indexes, look at the query optimizer to understand statistics and so forth, and look at managing SQL Server. Things like managing resource utilization, designing policies for policy-based management, looking at data compression strategies, and even some ways of automating SQL Server management. SQL Server Agent is one way to automate SQL Server management, and we will spend some time looking at how to set up operators and notifications and jobs that use alternate credentials, and even jobs that target multiple servers. Finally, we'll wrap up with ways of connecting multiple SQL servers together and distributing data. First, distributing data with SQL Server integration services, and then connecting servers using linked servers and distributing data using SQL Server replication. Are you ready to go? Let's get started. First, let's just take a look at some of the tools we'll be using in SQL Server, including SQL Server Management Studio and the SQL Server Configuration Manager. The SQL Server Configuration Manager is sort of your place to deal with all the different services that SQL Server has, making sure they're set to start automatically or manually, or changing the accounts that they use to log on. And it's also where you decide what networking protocols each instance of SQL Server will listen to. So keep that in mind as one of the tools you'll be using. And you will also be using SQL Server Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio is sort of the all-in-one management interface. That's where you'll tell SQL Server what to do, create and manage databases, and really this is your central launching point for just about all the management tasks that you'll be expected to know about SQL Server. So, we've seen what's coming up, we've looked at the table of contents, and you've seen the SQL Server management tools. You'll certainly be seeing a lot more of them later. We're ready to get started with SQL Server and start talking about its physical concepts. I hope this has been informative for you so far, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.